And tell us about the book, first of all.
It's based on a diary I kept when I was 18. It wasn't even my idea to keep the diary. Some older kids told me to do it. We're probably all of 20 years old, but I figured they were wise and knew what they were talking about, so I kept a diary, and I carried it around with me for years, and I had it committed to memory almost, because it was such a weird year that I didn't want it ever happening again. And so to avoid history repeating itself, I memorized it, and I guess 25 years later, I turned it into what is essentially a nonfiction novel so that you can tell what's going on. I was true to the voice and sort of the essence of the diary, how it dissolved and came back, the different voices in it, either very young or very psychotic or drugged, and then pregnant. They were all very different voices. And so it took 4 years to turn it into a book, even though it already was a book.
Right. It was really interesting, actually, that you said it wasn't like just a piece of your life, it was actually the beginning of something.
Yeah, I don't think I even embarked on any of the journeys that I was beginning at the time. I think it is definitely the seed of event after event after event, and career after career after career, and struggle after struggle after struggle. I wrap it up nicely, and the diary wrapped it up nicely, but really I was to continue to screw up and fix things and screw up again and fix them, and all in those same paths. They just all started then.
Yeah. And the title itself, Rat Girl, where does that come from?
For some reason, I used to call myself a rat girl, as if there was a subspecies of human that was sort of wretched and wanted to turn that wretchedness into beauty, so you'd wear your wretchedness on your sleeve. I didn't know many other rat people. Gordon Gano, I thought, was one. We used to play together. He was in the Violent Femmes. Yeah. We used to play together, and we looked alike, and we were whiny, and we were gross, and yet we were trying to turn that stuff into something that was not just wretched, but wretchedly beautiful.
And you kind of touched on this already, but what was that like as your adult self, now looking back and hearing all those voices and seeing them again, even in print?
I got addicted to it. I was writing at night. I'd put my kids to bed, sleep for a couple hours, and get up about 1 or 2 a.m., and then write until the kids got up. And at that time, you have spirals for eyeballs, for one, but also it's very quiet, and you don't know if it's day or night, and you can time trip easily. You hear people's voices, you see their idiosyncrasies, you remember things about people that are no longer with us because you can. And when I later brought the book to all of the people who were in it, they said, yeah, that's how it was, and it's just that it's almost a preconscious memory. I don't carry it around, but I could go back there reading the book. I was a little worried that maybe shared perception was a myth.
I was wondering about that. Is there a fear at all of putting out a book like this that's so personal?
Oh, there should have been. I'm just so stupid. I was writing it and wanting it to be good, and trying to stay true to the voice, trying to take clever out, trying to take morals out. And there's certainly no morals. It's just like, get pregnant, be in a rock band, don't take your medication. But it all worked out. But I just kind of was so focused on the work itself that it didn't occur to me that anyone else would read it other than the editor at Penguin. And I came home from a European tour, and there were stacks and stacks of rat girls on my front porch. And it was like a kick in the stomach. It was the first time I realized that other people would read it, people who were in the book. So I hand-delivered books to everyone who is still in it and alive, and they've all been wonderful. Even to the point of being very low-key, they're like, yeah, that's what happened.
And ultimately, there's an aspect of this book that probably helped a lot of people, too.
Well, that's why I did it. I am not particularly exhibitionistic in my thinking, and it's hard enough playing music that kind of sucks the bones out of you, but I have no choice but that. This was a choice that I made in the hope that it could help anybody that was like that. If there was just one person that was like that, then they would probably need to hear this story.
And you talked about music, and you talk about hearing music in the book. And initially I was thinking, gosh, as a musician, wouldn't that be cool to be able to hear music all the time and just kind of have these melodies written for you? But it really was a blessing and a curse for you?
It is still a blessing and a curse. It took a long time for me to get to blessing, because even as a musician, to have other melodies going on in your head while you're trying to play is very difficult. And it took a decade at least for me to believe that they were in my head. I still don't experience them that way. I hear it in the room, and everyone around me says they don't. Although now the people who are close to me, my band members, my husband, they can feel a song sometimes before I do. They feel it buzzing on me, as if it is a seizure-like activity, like a charge, a change in my charge.
Yeah, true energy.
Right, yeah.
Fascinating. Now, kind of switching gears a little bit, but there's a wonderful character in the book, and I have to tell you, I'm so jealous because I always wanted to grow up in a Busby Berkeley musical, so to be friends with Betty Hutton, I'm just like, this is not fair. But tell us a little bit about Betty, and really what she meant to you.
You know, so many people thought that was psychosis. They thought that I imagined a movie star that I went to school with. It's like,
well, in a way, you read this and you think, okay, Hollywood would go, no, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work.
I know. And, you know, she was real. She was hyper real. She was very in your face. And we were well suited for that reason. We were so complimentary. I was so quiet and she was so loud, and I was so young and she was so old, and yet we weren't that different. We were very, like she said, kind of gender free, and we were both, I guess, performers. I still don't feel like a performer, but in order to be a musician, you have to perform, and so I had to wrap my head around it, and I did it with her help. And her advice was a little bizarre, but it has all come to make sense. It was just her vocabulary that was out of context for me. She learned it all from Al Jolson. You know, she was at throwing music concerts. But she figured, I'm old, I won't get what the kids are listening to. And of course, no kids were listening to throwing music.
I love that story in the book with her and the priest in the back of the bar that you're playing. I was trying to picture that, and it's so bizarre, but wonderful.
That poor priest was at every show, too. She would drag her priest to every show, and he was just right there, happy to be there, listening to me scream and yell.
It's so cute. But ultimately, one of the things she always said to you was, you kind of have to leave holes in the narrative to let the story be told, and that's true of this diary.
It is, and she didn't actually say that, she just lived it for me. She had this fairy tale story that was, I guess she had told herself so many times that it was vividly clear to me. And what I took from it is that a real life has story arcs. It has morals. It has foreshadowing of all things. And so I just took this 1 year and made sure to glean those story arcs and the foreshadowing and the morality that is inherent in everyone's story. It may not follow any story you've read before, but for me it was true. And so I felt comfortable leaving things out. And some readers have not been as comfortable with the fact that I have a baby Jesus in it. But it was better that way. I just took out everything boring and everything clever and everything that happened over and over and over again. And
yeah, it really, you walk the journey with you almost as a reader, and I think by allowing us to kind of fill in those blanks ourselves, it allowed that to happen. And there's, in the middle of the book, you're kind of reading along, and then there's suddenly these 4, 6, 8 pages of what feels like mania, and and I feel that with you, and it's incredibly compelling as a reader. Did you notice that as you were putting this together, or did you know that would somehow have an impact on other people?
I knew it was awful. Every draft, I would try to skip that part, just say, I'm sure it's fine, it is what it is. But I had to admit that ultimately I was more comfortable with that psychotic voice than I was with the medicated voice that followed it, which was very robotic and reporting, and yet didn't seem to know the difference between something interesting and something boring, just pure reporting. And I had to let the book stay that way because that was my voice. then. It was harder for me to publish it with the medicated voice than with the psychotic one.
It was really amazing for you to let us in like that,
I've had people say, I'm on page 187 and I can't take it anymore. Is this going to stop? I say, just hang on.
I think, again, when you're talking about helping people, I think that is something that will really help people when they see it true like that and not written out like a real memoir of, well, today, this is what, I went to the doctor and this is what they said and this is what they prescribed and this let you actually experience it.
Well, that's nice of you to say. It wasn't easy to do because it's embarrassing. Yeah. And I don't celebrate mental illness. I have been arguing with journalists for 20 years who believe that there is a link between creativity and mental illness, and I just don't want to believe that. I want to think that a healthy mind speaks to healthy minds, and the creativity is something healthy. And in my experience, both mania and depression interfere with my work. They color it in inappropriate ways. The bright light of mania or the dark shadows of depression are not always appropriate for the song. And yet I've made that mistake over and over again. And I think maybe there's an expanded emotional vocabulary associated with this disease, and that's all I will admit to, because I just don't want to believe that there's anything good about being broken.
Do you think that there was anything particular about telling the story at this time and maybe why you'd never told it before?
It was the right time for me because it was such an idealistic time in my life that unraveled as the music industry collapsed. My career took off because I hated the music industry. I've been trying to escape it since I got into it. So it was at the time when I started my most recent band, 50 Foot Wave, where I started a nonprofit called Cash Music to help musicians reach listeners without a middleman like a record company and without having to be played on the radio, without having to dumb down their product. And so my sponsors became the listeners, meaning that they were in no way interested in the marketability of my product. For the first time in my life, no one wanted to dumb down my product. In fact, all they wanted was the truth, so I got to go into my little lab and perform my experiments and give them the results without tampering with them. And so I think if I had tried to do this earlier, it would have had a more snide voice. I was able to grab the idealism of my 18-year-old self because it finally came back 25 years later.
I wanted to ask you about that. Where do you get your drive from? You do have drive, Kristen. I'm just telling you.
Really? No, I didn't really mean to write the book. A handful of journalists approached me offering to ghostwrite my memoir. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. It was all at the same time. There must have been a story that came out that made my life sound interesting that I didn't see. And I'm so doormat nice that I just said, oh, sure, go do whatever you want. That's so nice. Not realizing that what they meant was months and months of interviews. One guy implied he'd move in with me for a while so I could talk about feelings. It's like a nightmare. So I stopped returning their calls, and then management noticed that there was no longer a book and said, since you aren't willing to talk to anyone but yourself, you're in charge of writing the book.
Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. It was really fun to talk to you.
Thank you. It was lovely.